Well, I'm here with Dr. Chris Newman, who runs Partner Abuse Interventions. Chris, do you want to say anything about that?
Just that we're a specialist organisation that does assessments, in particular risk assessments for the family courts where domestic violence is a child protection concern.
And so we're going to talk about risk assessment today in absolute, I suppose, headlines around risk assessment to help those of you on the front line who have to do a lot of risk assessments quite swiftly. Chris, what would you say is the first thing that stands out to you about risk assessing?
The first thing that stands out is definitely what information do you have about the pattern, the frequency and the severity of the past violence and abuse. Importantly, including within that coercive controlling behavior. So what do you know about what do you know, and what can you find out, and what do you need to find out about those in particular?
Yeah, I've just been risk assessing all of my clients at Positive Change Service, and I realised that the first thing I'm looking for is what have they done historically, and I'm really looking out as well for those lethality risk factors, like anyone who's punched someone to the head, strangles, made threats with knives, actually holding a knife, these kinds of things where they could have potentially killed someone in the past. Because of course, whatever you've done in the past, you could potentially do in the future.
Absolutely. And in a sense, I think often, particularly in these circumstances that we're in at the moment, we're trying to predict, we're trying to make the best judgment we can. I don't think we can predict. We're trying to make the best judgment we can about risk from not many data points often. Do you know what I mean? But nevertheless, we have to use the data points we've got. And if what we've seen in the past is sporadic but high-level violence, then we can think that in the future, that's the best guess we can make about what will happen in the future. If what we've seen in the past is an escalation, then the best prediction or the best guess we can make about what's going to happen in the future is that it's actually going to get worse.
So that trajectory will continue as it has been so far. Yeah, I think also within the criminal justice system, and that's often where children's social care get their information, the information can be very one incident based. It's about the last arrest, the last incident. But in children's social care, I think it's important to remember those risk factors persist. If someone's had been violent to 3 of their historical partners, or been violent going back 10 years, information about all of that is still relevant.
Still very relevant. In particular, violence in past relationships, because there it's much harder to argue that, as people often do, that it's something about this partner that makes the conflict escalate. If it's happened in 2 or more relationships, then it's evidently something about the perpetrator themselves. Of course, we don't want to restrict our assessment to that. We're not just trying to protect here against extreme physical harm. We're trying to protect children against the impact of what's been going on. So really, if you're thinking about the welfare of children, what you're looking at is you're trying to think about what it's like for the child to be in the home with this person. And so if there are frenzied, emotional outbursts, if there's arguments that go on all night, if there's screaming, if there's relatively low level violence, but it's frequent, then that's giving us a picture of what's happening for these children and what they're currently, of course, very, very isolated with.
Which also brings to mind for me violence during pregnancy, which shows a lack of inhibition when the child is around, or when there's someone vulnerable around, and also it brings to mind the consideration of the impact of the violence and abuse on the other parent. Let's say it's father to mother, which it just most frequently is, the impact on her capacity to parent and her mental health.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Say a bit more about coercive control and what you look out for there.
I think what you're looking for is behavior which causes the victim to alter their behavior to avoid punishment, threat, or just their lives being made hell by the actions of the perpetrator. And I think there's a subset of this which is particularly risky, which is the kind of obsessive and coercive control that you might call jealous surveillance. So there's a subset of perpetrators who are particularly jealous, controlling, sexually possessive, and will often irrationally dominate and threaten their partners around their imagined contact with other people, and so thereby create a sort of prison for them.
Mm. And I'm also thinking how important it is to think about the kind of power that people can use to coercively control partners. So the intersections of their power dynamics within the relationship. So if you've got somebody who is the sole financial earner in the family,
Absolutely.
they immediately have power they can abuse. If they're significantly older, that gives them a sort of power differential. And particularly, there's a lot of research around teenage relationships that suggests that a more than 2-year age difference massively increases the risk of domestic abuse and sexual violence in a teenage kind of relationship, from about 15% if you're same age to about 85% likelihood if you've got more than 2 years between you. So obviously that extends as you get older and looks more like a 10-year differential. But these kinds of differences in immigration status, who's got their name on the tenancy these days. And I'm also thinking about those kind of more circumstantial types of abuse, such as things that sort of have the feeling of honor-based violence, so-called, where perhaps even the victim's own family are part of the abuse, and also in-law abuse, where the perpetrator's family are part of the abuse. Those sort and gang-related systems, all these sort of honor-based systems that hold a victim in a relationship and making it much harder for them to leave.
There's issues around not just the domestic abuse behavior, but more the general profile of the person. So if somebody is outside relationships involved in risky criminal activity, drug dealing, crime that involves violence, that involves retaliatory violence, whatever it may be, all these things are strong indicators really that this person is not going to manage relationships well and is likely to be coercive within them. Or coercive or uncontrolled in their management of aggression.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, I just thought of the thing that probably people are quite familiar with in children's social care to look out for is the toxic trio, which, you're looking at mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and domestic violence coming together, which are still a particularly worrying combination.
In a way, we have two kinds of information when we're assessing risk. One is like the hard data, you might call it. What we know about the person, what their behaviour in the past, things about their criminal profile, etc., etc. And then the other thing is, of course, what we get, the impression we get when we speak to them. And I guess what I'd really advise is that when you're trying to make an assessment of risk, very much anchor your assessment of risk in the historical data, in what we know about the person's past behavior. And even if you speak to the perpetrator, or you speak to the couple and they both say, oh no, everything's fine now, we're doing well, we're talking, we're communicating much better, etc., etc., that's hopefully a good sign. But nevertheless, I wouldn't be radically shifting my assessment of risk until I'd seen a good long period of time where that had been put into action. And that's months, not days or weeks.
I mean, I think you make a really important point there. There's something that I see a lot in children's social care chronologies, which is victims disclosing and then retracting information about violent incidents. And I think it's important for anyone in children's social care that you're not basing your risk assessment. It's not the same as a criminal conviction. It doesn't have to be proven and evidenced. Most things that are disclosed and later retracted happened. People retract things. People retract
unfortunately,
things.
For all sorts of reasons. Very understandable reasons as well.
Particularly when they're involved with children's social care.
Yes.
And so so don't feel that you need to wait for proven evidence events in order to consider them in a risk assessment.
One of the things that can make us kind of relax a bit and think, oh, well, everything's all right. As if the couple say, oh, no, we're separated now, you know what I mean? We've kind of left each other. So we're leaving each other alone. And of course, what we know from criminal statistics and behavior statistics is that separation actually increases the risk for a considerable point of time after separation. That's when most of the really serious violence and dangerous violence happens often and the majority of police call-outs, I think, still in London are going out to separated couples.
I think one other thing that I think is worth people considering is victims' fear of what will happen is actually quite predictive. You know, it's certainly not the case that when people are saying there's nothing to worry about, we should believe it, because as we've just discussed, there are so many reasons to sort of deny and retract fears about domestic abuse. But if someone is really scared that their partner will kill them, that is sadly quite predictive of severe violence. Yeah. So I think it's also worth drawing everyone's attention to the Dash Risk Indicator checklist. That's the entry point for referring a case to MARAC, and reminding everyone that this checklist was designed for the criminal justice system and for victims who are actually really disclosing, who have called the police in and who are pushing through with their statements. Within children's social care, as Chris and I have already said, a lot of people are in the process of minimising and denying their abuse. So I really recommend that you fill out a version of the Dash such as I have here, which first of all is not single incident based. It doesn't say, has this happened in the recent incident? It says, has such and such, like using weapons, ever happened? And also, it asks us to use our professional opinion. You can use past disclosures, even if a victim is in current retraction. So, so take a look at that and consider using that just as a checklist to help you make a swift decision about risk. So, Chris, I want to really thank you for your time and your expertise, and I'm going to ask you back for some future recordings.
Okay.